Good morning to everyone. We are going to begin Sunday school this morning. And as is our custom, we're going to start Sunday school with prayer. Father, thank you for the morning that you have provided to us. Lord, regardless of any challenges we faced, we know that the provision of a day is a blessing, and especially that we get to come be a part of church, be in fellowship with one another, to join together, to build up one another. Lord, that is a great blessing to us. And so, Father, as we come before you, it's with thanksgiving, but it's also with hopefulness that our time together, and especially our time in your word, would be fruitful and encouraging to us, but also that it would challenge and change us. Thank you for the opportunity to gather. It's in the name of Christ that we pray. Amen. Okay, as we continue our study on hell and heaven, and we're dealing with heaven now, and we're talking through these questions. We have one question today we're really going to focus in on, and at the outset, this question seems very easy to answer. Because it's probably very easy to answer. Will heaven be joyous? And if we went out and we just talked to people, and we surveyed everyone in the world that we came across, and we asked, do you believe that there is a heaven or an afterlife or something like that, we would find probably a lot of people do. And if we were to ask them, what do you think it's going to be like? Do you think it's going to be a happy place or not? I think the vast majority of people are going to say, yes, it's going to be a happy place. Because we use the word heaven even to mean that, right? We could go out and we could eat a cheesecake, and we could say this cheesecake is heavenly, and we mean it's really, really good. So even in the word heaven, there's this idea that it's good, that it would be a joyous kind of place. But it's a question we're going to start with this morning. Oh, yeah, I'm on. Good. So some common expectations. When we think of heaven, the obvious assumption is, as I said, that heaven is joyous. It's the common view of heaven in most opinions and religions. However, we don't want to be concerned about the opinions of other people or even what other religions are teaching. What we want to be concerned with is, what is the biblical truth? When we look at the Bible, does the Bible present heaven to be a joyous place? Here's the answer. Heaven is a place of bliss. So I've moved even beyond the word joy. We've passed joy by, and we're just going to fall into bliss when we talk about heaven. This positive place of the afterlife, heaven, is referred to in the Bible a number of times as paradise. Paradise means happy, right? It's a place where things are good. And so heaven is going to have this idea for us. It's going to be a place of bliss. Let's look at some of those verses. This is Luke 23:43. Of course, this is when Jesus is on the cross, and he's speaking with one of the thieves who were next to him, who had also been crucified. And he turned to Jesus, though it seems from Matthew he must have started with a mocking of Jesus. But as time wears on, he turns to Jesus and says, I want to be a part of your kingdom. And Jesus' response, he said to him, truly I say to you, today you'll be with me in paradise. So, paradise. Good, happy place. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 3 and 4. Paul, we looked at these verses, I think it was last week. We talked about this some. But Paul said, I know that this man was caught up into paradise. Whether in the body, out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. So he went there, but he recognized while he was there, this place is paradise. Now, we'll get to some of that. I was getting ahead of myself. I'm so excited about where we're going to go. Okay, so paradise. Revelation chapter 2, verse 7. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. So there is an expectation of when we go into eternity, we go into a place of paradise. And that seems to cover the whole scope of things. I mean, we talked about that there must be, just based on how the Bible talks about it, when we die, there's an intermediate place, whether it's good or bad, in which we wait for that final place of eternity. And in the biblical kind of discussion about it, if you die and you're in a right relationship with God, you have the relationship with Jesus, and so forth, when you die, you go to a positive place. And the Bible talks about both that intermediate and the eternal as paradise. So this is a good place. It is a joyous place. Now, part of the joy of that paradise is, of course, just the possession of eternal life, which is some of what Jesus in Revelation 2 is connecting it to, because you'll eat of the tree of life, which is in that paradise of God. So some of the joy is just having eternal life rather than eternal destruction. But the term paradise communicates this is going to be a good place. Even so, people have objections to heaven being a place of joy or bliss. I just want that to sink in for a moment. Like, culturally speaking, as a culture, as a society, we have a view of the afterlife that, regardless of religious distinctions, many people feel like there's going to be this heaven out there. You know, if I die, even if we go and we talk to people who don't believe in God, they still have kind of this vague, there's going to be something out there, and it's going to be, I'm going to get to go to heaven. Yet there are people who look at that and go, well, heaven is not going to be happy. And you think, how? How can that be? Maybe you're not thinking that. I thought that, and so I went and found out why people think it wouldn't be. Objection number one is the problem of perfection. I have had a conversation, at least one, face-to-face with a person who objected to heaven, and he objected to heaven on this basis, that you're saying it's going to be perfect. Do you think heaven's going to be perfect? And I said, yes. He said, then I can't believe in it. Oh, right. He said, the problem is, and this is what's up there, that our definitions of perfect might differ. So what's perfect for you might not be what's perfect for me. So if you sat down and you said, if everything were perfect for me, here's what it would include. Now, I've already hinted earlier that mine is going to have some cheesecake, because that's heavenly. Also pie. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of food involved in my view of perfect. And so, it's going to include those things. And you might look at it and go, well, that's not what my view of perfect is. My view of perfect is going to include all these other things. And so the objection is that here's the problem. There can't be this perfect place because it would have to have different things. And those different things might conflict and they may not work together. So let's just imagine, and maybe this represents some people in the room right now, your perfect place includes hunting. Just fine. But there may also be other people in the room right now who their perfect place includes cuddling all the forest creatures. And we go, how do those two things work together? It seems like only one person is going to get to be happy in that scenario. And Dan's laughing very hard because he feels like it's going to be him. Hopefully you're not a cuddler of the wild nature. So, how are those things going to work? Because it's going to be different. All right, so that's the objection. Honestly, this is kind of a silly objection. The person I was talking to, I had a pretty good relationship with, and I told them, that's kind of a silly objection to have to heaven. I mean, what a silly reason to object to heaven. It's going to be perfect. I mean, heaven's going to be really big, so maybe there's like a hunting zone and a cuddle zone, and you just go to your thing and you're happy. I was like, I could think of 100 ways we could make this work. But the best answer is that a perfect heaven, might seem contradictory, but here we go. Perfection is objective. That's it. That is, we're thinking of like, this is what would be perfect to me. That's actually a subjective idea, right? I'm the subject, and so I'm the one who's going to define perfect. But when we're talking about perfection, it's actually an objective kind of thing. There is an ultimate thing which is perfect. And it may not match up to what I think perfect is. And so I may get to heaven and be surprised. In fact, I can virtually guarantee that I'm going to be surprised if I get to heaven. If I get to heaven and I'm not surprised, that will surprise me. So it's done. Right. That's exactly it. Our thinking is so limited right now. I don't care about hunting now. So, yeah, it's not going to affect me in the future. But you're right. The way we think now is very limited. And some of that is in our own nature, our own experience, that we just think in very narrow kinds of terms because that's the way we think. But when we get to heaven, we're going to see things in such a much broader scope of the world that it's really going to change our view. And we're going to see that objective perfection. Now, there are things like we can start getting hints of it now. And let me I'm going to share a little bit of camp with you. During camp, there is a cabin cleanup. The campers have to keep their cabin kind of clean, because if you don't have that, oh my, it would be a disaster by the end of the week. So it's kind of a disaster every day. But if you make them every day, go back in and kind of pick it up. It at least keeps it at like a manageable disaster kind of thing. You don't have to bring in FEMA. So you make them clean it every day. And then we have someone at the camp who goes around and checks things and gives awards and stuff like that. Pastor Daryl, a few years ago, introduced what he called the line of truth. And so he would take a picture of their cabins, and he would say, here's a line. And he'd put a straight line on the picture, and then anything that would protrude from the line, he would tell them, if it protrudeth, removeth. In fact, you can go ask a number of our youth over in the youth Sunday school. They would, if you just said to them, if it protrudeth, most of them would finish with removeth. And the idea was, if it's outside of this line, we get rid of it. And so that was an objective line. Not really, because it was Pastor Daryl, so it was subjective to him, but it was a straight line. And while the line that he put in place was his line, the straightness of it is just that. It's a straight line. So we begin to see some perfection at play, right? And it begins to push, and it pushes kids. Like, they'll fight for it. Last year at teen camp, it got to the point, I was helping Pastor Daryl, and it got to the point they were doing such a good job. We were having to go around and look at the zippers on sleeping bags to see, are all the little tabs on their zippers pointed the right way? And that was the infraction that took place, because they did such a good job. That one particular cabin was amazing. But there's an objective standard, and then we begin to see, if things meet the objective, it's beautiful. So it will be in heaven. Perfection is actually an objective thing. It's not our idea of perfection. When we get to heaven, it will be what is truly perfect. And that'll be an amazing thing to see and to be a part of. And the second thing here, because I have two, is that perfection is an outgrowth of life. It's not a lack. So this is one of those things when I talk to people about like this idea of, it can't be, because we would all have different ideas of perfect. Some of that is our misunderstanding of perfection. Perfection isn't about lacking this or lacking that, which is, Pastor Del, I see you over there, and the problem with the if it protrudeth, we removeth idea that it shouldn't be outside the line. The issue is not so much what's lacking, which is what people think about when they think about subjective ideas of perfect. It's about what is coming into it. So let me give you an example of this with the thing I said earlier. We might have people who like hunting and want that to be part of perfection, and we might have people like cuddling the wild animals and want those. And in either view, it would be, in the hunting view, the lack is, it's not that maybe, I don't know, we'd have to talk about those who want hunting to be part of perfection, but my guess is it's not the lack of cuddling the animals, it's just that they want something in addition to cuddling the animals, right? But if you're an animal cuddler, that was your idea of perfection. Perfection to you would lack that hunting side of things. But it's kind of a misconception of what perfection is, because it's not about what we're taking out of the system. Perfection is God's standard, and it's going to be something which is inborn into the system, and it's going to be an increase in the system. So it won't be that we're taking stuff out, we're adding stuff in. We're adding life into the process. So it would be perfect, so it can't exist. No, that doesn't work. Perfection is objective. It's God's perfection, and it's what he's bringing into eternity. So that objection fails. Objection number 2 is boredom. Heaven cannot be this happy, perfect place, because if it were, we would get terribly, terribly bored. In fact, I have had someone tell me I don't want to go to heaven because I would get bored there. The alternative is not terribly exciting. So that was a problem, and I talked about that with the person, but that was their thing. I don't want to be bored. Isaiah 66, verse 23. Isaiah writes, "From new moon to new moon and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares the Lord." So there is this eternal expectation of the worship of God. And because of that, sometimes there's this idea that since everything is perfect, there'll be no more excitement. That we're going to do this, if it's worship, as Isaiah says, and that's the thing that is going on, that it's going to become monotonous, and so it will be boring. Perhaps some might say, without the threat of danger and death, adventure is removed. Because if there isn't some sort of thrill, then is there really an adventure? That's kind of the concern. Now, you can think about that. You try to start thinking about, can I have adventure without some sort of danger? Hopefully death is not really high on your list of things. If it is, you live in a different class of adventures than I do. But maybe there's a little bit of danger to it. Yesterday, we took the Frontier camping team, some of them, we took them hiking just over here on the hills. But the spot we were on was above some of the rocks, and we were going over some crevices, deep gashes in the rock. And, the one spot where we crossed, the spot was only like this wide. So it wasn't a big jump that you had to go across. But when you look down, it was a good 20-foot drop. And while it was only that wide, you would realize walking across, I could fall through there. I mean, it's big enough I could slip down if I weren't so sure-footed to get across this 1-foot little gap. But going over that, and it was, I went over first, trailblazing. And then I got over, and I was waiting for people to come across, make sure everyone did it safely. And there were a few of them, not all of them were college students, but would go across and go, whoa, as they go over, because there's a danger there. And so there's some excitement. What if you didn't have that? Would there still be adventure? And there's some people who would look at heaven and go, wait a minute, if we don't have any of this adventure, then all we're going to have is boredom. Especially if all we're going to do is worship God, we're going to get so bored. Now, you don't have to raise hands for this, but let's just be honest in your own heart for a moment. Have you ever, in singing, not here at Southland, but maybe somewhere else, you were singing in a church and you were like, I'm kind of bored. boredom fails to understand the joy of worship. This goes back to that original question. Is heaven going to be a joyous place? I would say yes. It's not just joyous. This is a place of bliss. Well, what if we worship all the time? Aren't we going to get bored? Well, if you think that, we've missed some of the idea of worship. Heaven will not be boring because of our praise. This is first a failure to understand the true joy of praise now. And I think that's part of what happens to us. It's when we begin to feel boredom as we're in the midst of some sort of praise, that there's something going on in us, and we've missed out. We've come into some place of disharmony with the Lord or disharmony with worship. But if we find praising God to be boring, the fault lies in us. And we should recognize that. Worship of God should never be something which is boring to us. And if we find it so, the problem is with us. The joy in praise is not actually derived from our experience, but from our object. That is, when we go to praise God, we're looking to God. If you go into the worship of God and you look at my experience and you're like, this is boring because I'm not jumping up and down, or we're not moving around, or because this particular song doesn't ignite my passion, or whatever it may happen to be, and we're looking at what's my experience here, right there we have missed the point of worship, and we've missed the joy of worship, because the joy of worship is not about what my experience is. Worship is about the Lord. And it's about, our joy is about what we're worshiping. And so if we find ourselves to be bored in worshiping God, perhaps we have lost sight of the one we are praising. And instead, we're just drawing our attention to self. Yeah. Right. I would imagine. I don't know. I don't know how it could be boring. I do know in my own experience, in my own life, sure, there have been times, if I'm vulnerable and transparent with everyone, there have been times I've probably been bored. But that's true. I'm not in his presence in a direct way, but I am aware of him. And it's for me, even thinking about this, and with the person I was talking to, because again, this came out of an actual conversation I had with someone. They're going, "Oh, it's just going to be boring because we'll just be worshiping, just praising and stuff all the time." And it was convicting to me. Do I get bored worshiping God? And then if I'm bored worshiping God, is it his problem? Why isn't he more exciting? Oh, but God is terribly exciting. The problem is me. And so it's one of those things that we deal with. Boredom fails to understand the joy of worship. And it's a challenge to us to think about. Secondly, boredom fails to understand the marvel of heaven. So my posit to you is that heaven will be a place of incredible marvel, not just a place of bliss. Like, you're not going to go there and just feel happy. You're going to go there and be happy. And part of being happy is not just the emotion inside of you, but it's part of what is experienced, what is going on. And heaven is going to be a place of marvel, of wonder. So Revelation chapter 21, 15 through 21. This is a long passage, which is why it's not up on the screen, because that's a lot of verses to read through. But if you should go to Revelation 21, right at the back, and just kind of look over these verses, from verse 15 to verse 21, what we have here is a description of the new Jerusalem. So John is witnessing all these things, and he sees this new Jerusalem, and he goes He says, the one who spoke to me, which was an angelic being, had been speaking to him, he had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and walls. And the city lies foursquare, its length the same as its width, with the measuring rod, 12,000 stadia, which would be about 1,300 miles, 1,400 miles in that ballpark. So that's the city. Really big city. It takes a while to get across. I am personally hoping for like walking side or moving sidewalks. In my view of that's a different question. We're going to cover it at a different time. I don't want to ruin anything, but nope. So this incredibly sized city, and he goes out and he measures it, and then you skip to verse 18. He says, the wall was built of jasper, the city was pure gold, like clear glass. Foundations of the walls were adorned with every kind of jewel, jasper, sapphire, agate, emerald. I mean, he goes on and on, lists these things. He says the 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates made with a single pearl, which must be phenomenal. And what I want you to get more than just thinking about like the fine tooth of the description is just the sense of marvel that must be there. There are places when I, am out and about, sometimes when walking, hiking, even in the desert, but there have been plenty of places as I have grown up and I've been in the mountains, been on the plains, wherever, and sometimes you just come across something and it just stops you for a second and you go, wow, that is really neat. That is fascinating. I've had a few things that kind of catch my breath in nature as I have seen them and just kind of stop and behold. Am I alone? Anyone else had this kind of experience where you're like, that is awesome? Yeah. Think about this. This is just the New Jerusalem. And I cannot imagine walking around something that is described this way, moving sidewalk or not, just going around town and not stopping periodically to go, wow. Am I going to get bored? No. Because there's going to be so much just to see. And people, because we know people are in heaven. That was last week, right? So there's going to be all this stuff. God is creating all these things, all the universe he has created so that he might be known. That's why he put all this together. He was revealing who he is, not just in his word, but through all of nature. And that implies that if God has created all of the universe, that he could be known. It implies for us that we are to explore, we are to discover, and we are to understand. And so we will forever be growing in our knowledge of God. Now, I know different things appeal to different personalities, but this gets me absolutely charged. I'm kind of a bookish fellow. Anyway, I mean, maybe not in look. I know I'm very rugged and things in look, but in terms of personality, I'm a bookish kind of guy. I like to read and just get to know stuff, and I don't want to stop doing that. But here's everything in the universe, and it is designed to communicate who God is. And so we're going to be taking in all this stuff, getting to know God, increasing moment by moment through eternity in our knowledge of God. And as we increase in knowledge, we increase then in love. This is also an exciting thing to me. And I've shared it with, Right. Yeah, no evil. So it's all pure things we're learning. Yeah. Yeah, this would be good just as is, but it's going to be so much better. I think there's some future stuff dealing with that. Yeah. 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 Yeah, you're going to really like the next sentence that comes up. Okay? But it's along those lines, and I think you're right. I mean, he's a creative God. And so there's going to be so much just in what already is. And the more you know, the more you can love. And I tell young people all the time, I say, you guys, you hear it all the time in poetry, and you'll hear people say, oh, I love my wife more than the day we got married. And I say, let's talk about that. How could that possibly be? And some of them are like, nah. Maybe I didn't. I said, do you think if I said, I love my wife now more than the day we got married, do you think what I'm saying is I didn't really love her very much when we got married? Yeah. I know more about her. And the more I know someone, the more I can love someone. And so it is with God. The more we come to know God, the more we are going to love God. It doesn't mean we don't love God at the beginning. We do. But we're going to increase in those things. Also, we will get to know one another. And we might also realize, and this kind of goes to what I think you were saying as well, but you were talking about creativeness, and this is kind of on the side of that. But we might also realize that people are subjects, not objects, and therefore inexhaustible. An object we could exhaust. We could come to know everything we could come to know about the object. It may take a long time, but we can come to know everything about an object. But a subject is inexhaustible. Because even in the process of me getting to know a person, that person is already growing and changing and thinking and developing and responding. And subjects are inexhaustible. And so we're going to have a whole plethora of people to get to know. A plethora of people to pursue with passion and purpose. So all these people we're going to get to know. That doesn't even talk about God. God is completely inexhaustible because he's infinite. Maybe I could get to know someone so well that, in one day of eternity, I'm like, that sounds very similar to what you said yesterday. I mean, slightly different, but very similar. So I know you pretty well now. I'm going to give you some more time to change. So I'm going to go get to know someone else for 1,000 years, and then I can come back and see how far you've developed at that point. Well, I think you could be in heaven since it's based on a relationship with Jesus. You could consider people as objects or poorly or whatever and still trust in Jesus. All that will be corrected once you're in heaven. That we'll have the right thinking about those things. So it's possible. It's inexhaustible. But say you got to know everyone that well. That you're like, you've done most of the work, right? There's kind of a bell curve to it, and like you're changing, but not as much day by day now. And so I feel like I know you pretty well. And I've done that with everyone in my neighborhood of the New Jerusalem. And so I turn to God and I say, okay, I'm going to try to get to know God. That's going to take me a very long time. And in fact, because we're in heaven and because everything is perfect and because we will have been perfected, my getting to know you perfectly, until I know you perfectly and totally, I don't know God perfectly and totally because you're part of his creation. And since I'm never going to get to know you totally and perfectly, I'm never going to get to know God totally, like in a complete sense. I'm not going to know the whole of who God is. I will know him completely in the sense that I will know all of the aspects of him, but I'm not going to know all there is to know about him. I hope I can make that distinction here. But that's some of that is knowing one another. It's an inexhaustible thing. The idea that it's going to get boring misunderstands to me the marvel, because every day I'm going to get up and be like, oh, there's something new. Right. There will be, so like in the future, I mean, Jesus comes back, we're going to have the kingdom, the reign over that. Here with the New Jerusalem, we still have Jesus reigning over all the things of the earth, but into an eternal perspective. state. So it's not, we're not in this right now. This is all going to be future. But post the kingdom, Revelation, we have the great white throne judgment where everything gets judged and perfected, and then we're entering into that a state of eternal being. So there's earth is still here, and we would still be related to that in some aspects, because it is the place of the New Jerusalem for all of eternity and those things. So we still have this. I'm going to give you a little bit of some things that we'll talk about later, but I think we're going to have the ability, as Vicky, you were saying, can't we just think there? I think we'll have some of that, and that we will have the whole cosmos to explore for eternity. Yeah, I told you, it gets me very excited. So does that clarify? Well, heaven, we're using heaven at that point as the blissful eternal state. So we're not talking about, and maybe this is more what you're thinking, like I talked about last week, there are those three positions of the atmosphere, the sky, and stuff. This, when we're talking about heaven now, I'm just talking about the blissful state of eternity. Post-millennial kingdom, an eternal thing, and it's blissful. So this idea of heaven. So it wouldn't be necessarily one of those three things which get used as heaven from a biblical perspective, but just in our cultural understanding. Right. Because I think when he's talking about knowing fully, when we talk about completeness, maybe if I can use the word complete instead of fully for a moment, there's kind of two kinds of complete. I can know something completely in that, I can know my wife completely. I know the things she likes and doesn't like, and all of that. So I can know the complete thing. I can know her fully in that sense. I'm not saying that I do, but it's possible, theoretically. I can know her in that sense. But because she's a person, and because she's continually growing, and even if we removed people, like she's going around heaven, and she's in this eternal state, she's going around and learning all these things. She's changing too. And so the next day that we wake up, it's going to be different than that because of our states in heaven. I'm just using a wife as an example. But the next day, she's going to be a little bit different than she was today, because she's going to know things. And so there's going to be more things I could learn about her, because she might have gone out and seen something I haven't seen, and she's going to want to express that or share that, whatever. So I could know her completely in the sense that I can contain what I know about her, but I don't know all of the truth that she has yet, because she's also growing. So we can know something in a complete sense where we contain it, and I think that's what Paul's talking about in 1 Corinthians. But we don't necessarily know every detail of the thing yet, especially with people, because people are changing and interacting and growing in that sense. Does that resolve the... Okay. All right, so we're going to move on and make sure I get through the last thing. The objection that it's going to be boring is just, I think it's a misunderstanding, of what heaven is going to be like, because it's going to be terribly exciting to me, because we're going to grow in knowledge. But also, if it's about worship, it just misunderstands worship too. And those are both things we can talk about with people. Yeah. I know the latter one is Psalm 16:11. His pleasures forevermore at his right hand. Great things, and things that we don't know yet. All right, so objection 3, what about the lack of certain people? Now, of all the objections to heaven being joyous, this is the one that I think carries the most actual weight. To say that heaven is going to be boring, that's a problem of our understanding of what is boring and not boring. To say that heaven is going to be perfect and so it can't be real, or it's not going to be joyous, is a misunderstanding of pretty much everything that would be of eternal wonder. But this one is a little bit different. Revelation chapter 21, verse 8. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portions will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So the truth from that is that there will be some people who will not be in heaven. And that means that those people who are in heaven, in this heavenly state, will have friends and family who will not be there. And so the question is, does that remove the joyousness of heaven? And the answer, as I have up there, is no. But that's easy to give the answer. We want to give some thought as to why that's the answer. Why wouldn't that? Or how do we maintain joy if that's the case? But I want to show you a verse. We looked at Isaiah 66 earlier, and so we're going to look at another one. This is Isaiah 66, verse 24. They shall go out and look on the dead bodies of the men who have rebelled against me, for their worm will not die, their fire shall not be quenched, and they shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. There's this going out, this surveying of those who are judged. When we are glorified, that is, when we're prepared for that heavenly state, we will gain a new perspective. It's part of the change that's going to undergo us. And that new perspective would include a right recognition of God, a right recognition of his purposes, his righteousness, and ultimately the truth about sin. And so we're going to have this perspective on things which is very different than the perspective we may now have. So the redeemed, if we kind of give Isaiah some room as we're thinking about what Isaiah says, the redeemed will be aware of those in judgment. There's an awareness that there are those who are being judged. Now, the awareness is not a source of joy. So I'm not saying that you would go out and take joy in that. But what it is, because this is destruction, what it is that it's satisfaction regarding God's character. So with this perspective that we would gain in an eternal place, an understanding of God's plans and purpose, there's an understanding that God's character as a righteous God, as a holy God, he satisfies that holiness against the sin which was committed against him. And while we would take no joy in destruction, we would take no joy in the fact that people have separated themselves from God and people are suffering for that, we can be satisfied that God's character is being met, that he is expressing fully who he is, even against sin. So there could be the satisfaction and will be the satisfaction of his character. God is righteous and holy. He is a just judge. And so while this is not a source of joy, we do see the satisfaction of his character there. So there is this objection, well, there are going to be people that won't be there. That is a true thing.